working with some of the bigger names, but yeah, I shouldn't be overcompensating in this company of you guys. So yeah, we've gathered a great set of experts that are working for some of the bigger names within the indie industry, and the great thing about them as personalities is that they've also been through the major approach to things, right? So that's how we're gonna delve into this discussion. So the first question that I really want to ask you guys is about where do we draw the indie line? Because we want to start with some definitions. What constitutes an indie label? Is it just not being Warner, Sony, or Universal, or is it also based on approach?
If I can go first. I think this, first and foremost, is based on approach and mentality. By definition, I think indie labels tend to move much more faster than majors, and their approach to promotions and the A&R mentality altogether tend to be more unique rather than a major whose most of the marketing is on the marketing side. Most of it, what it's doing is pushing ad budgets and stuff like that. And I don't think I know the conversation about ownership tends to diverge the crowd, but I think as long as the core people working there still have an indie mentality, it doesn't really matter how much stake a major company owns in PS or anything like this. And I think you can be one of the best examples to confirm or deny.
Let's go. On the spot.
Yeah, no, right. For me, it's also, even with the connection, Universal Music and peers that I won't comment, it's the approach, the indie approach, the mentality, the spirit of how we work projects and how we, as peers, are into music. And I can say this from my personal perspective. I was working for Universal Music before, and I'm now working for peers, and it's another mentality. It's less budget, but more passion, more creativity, more love for the music, and yeah, that's where I draw the line.
Yeah, I would just echo everyone else and say also that it's definitely an approach, and I think at Partisan, one thing that we really value is also working with other independent companies. So, for instance, we've worked with PS for basically a decade now, another independent company, and we'll always try and work with like creatives and other marketing companies, digital marketing companies that are also independent. And I think it's kind of, yeah, I guess you're just like fostering that sort of independent community in the music industry. But then the other thing is, I think we also always try to invest in an artist for the long term. So like we've now done 5 Idols albums, and everything that we do with them is a decision that we make together, and we're investing in like not only Idols' career but in the future of the label as well. And I think it's that kind of like long-term approach for longevity that is also important.
One other measure of what constitutes a major, and I credit Rob Gruchka from Beggars for giving me this stat, is simply market share. And I think if a label has over 5% global market share, they're considered a major. And currently that only obviously is the 3 recognized majors, but there are some labels who are getting close to that kind of market share. And I think in terms of the ethos, I totally agree with Ellie about the investment long-term in talent with indies. But, and indies can kind of be more agile by being small, but I think any company that becomes as huge as the current majors are is going to suffer from inertia and suffer from, layers of hierarchy and bureaucracy. That's just what happens with big organizations. So it's kind of easy to say that potentially the majors have some kind of nefarious purpose, but often they're just big organizations, and like governments, they're just kind of inefficient, just to give a slightly different perspective.
That's a great note to make.
Yeah, what do I have to add to that? I think all has been said. I think for me personally, I think the passion that people have at the indies is just like, that's something I've not that seen before in that sense. I think that's really valuable for artists as well, building a long-term relationship and yeah, not just going for the money and going for the hits, but really, yeah, building a sustainable long-term career.
So it's about the people, it's about the culture, it's about how driven we are by the music, and of course we can all agree that it's not as corporate, perhaps, right? So it's the feeling is a lot more like a family-owned business. But if we can, does that work? Okay. Yeah, if we can delve deeper into those differences, can we talk about what are the business model, concretely speaking, differences between indies and majors? Like, for example, many artists are of the belief that if they go into a major, all of the decisions are going to be taken top down, right? So you've got a manager, or you've got a CEO, or you've got whatever it might be, a GM, that is deciding on whether something to be released or when for it to be released. And because they've got this belief, they obviously opt out for the indie label where decisions are taken collaboratively. So you don't have a top-down approach, you rather have a flat hierarchy where the label is pretty much at the same spot as the artist. So what are some of those key differences, really concretely speaking, about the business model?
I mean, I think that the two that definitely spring to mind for me is, the first one is the obvious one, which is the deal structures. So traditionally, independent labels will have much, much more artist-friendly deals. You know, in a simplistic terms, most of our deals are like 50-50, and we're signing a 1-album deal with an option, or maybe 2-album deal. And it just means that, you know, artists don't ever feel like they're stuck in a deal. And you hear, you know, I mean, I've never worked at major, but you hear these kind of horror stories of artists who have just been, like, you know, trapped in like a 5-album deal. We recently signed Laura Marling, who had been on Virgin Records, and she'd signed this deal, which was like, she's never actually said, but she's alluded to it being kind of like 90-10% royalties to her. And being stuck in this 5-album deal that she signed when she was 16, and basically like releasing a 5th album, not because she was proud of it, but just simply to get out of the deal. And then yeah, came to Parsan, and we do that with Chrysalis Records. But I would say the other part of that is, I think at least I always try to like be extremely transparent in terms of when we're making decisions about campaigns, especially financial decisions. And I think a good example of this is we have an artist on the roster who streams very well in Indonesia, and Indonesia is one of the like the best performing markets on their Spotify. And the manager really wanted to hire a promo team to kind of cover Indonesia, but other parts of Southeast Asia. And we got a quote from this company who are great, who we've worked with, but the quote was like $10,000 to work on a campaign. And it just wasn't like a good investment. And so I made a real point of sitting with the manager, going through the revenue statements. And when we did that, I was like, okay, this artist is making, you know, £500 a year in Indonesia because the payout rates are so much, like, just so much worse. Is it sensible to invest $10,000 into a promo team when actually, like, so much of the work we could probably do ourselves? There's so many other strategies that we can do without just kind of throwing money at it. And I think once we did that, he was like, oh yeah, this makes total sense. And I think, I mean, again, I've never worked at a major, but you hear these horror stories of just artists who will just never recoup because so much money's been spent, and like just on the basis of nothing, I guess. So yeah, deals and kind of like transparent finances would be my 2 takeaways.
Great.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting example with like actively going into a territory where you see the audience is, because I feel like the majors are very much focused on their local market share, their local territory, their local teams, and their local artists, and that's very limiting in terms of like building out of your territory, because your label team is very much incentivized to build your local market, and sometimes even competing with each other. For example, a label from, let's say, Sony Music Germany, Sony Music Netherlands, they could be competing for the same artists with each other because they have their own way of working and way of thinking. So I think the difference with indies is, at least from my perspective, is that we can much easier go where the audience is and where the opportunities are, also in terms of like looking at different territories and just following up with an independent team that you can hire and really actively leaning into the opportunities that are there internationally.
I also think that major labels can sign, due to their financial power, they can sign whatever artist they would like to sign, and they can sign just to make their roster and their catalog grow, and they don't necessarily care about each and every single project and artist. So I can speak from my perspective again that if we sign an artist to Pierce, we calculate and think this specific project through, and we wouldn't sign an artist just to broaden our roster, but always because we believe in the single project and the artist and the album that the artist is going to release, and there's never just signing someone for signing reasons.
Just to add to that, I also think that the current business model has changed a lot, especially for the majors nowadays, because they're chasing trends and whatever TikTok song blows up and stuff like that. So compared to, and they might sign a lot of artists who have a bit of a movement, of a hype, of a trend online now, but not with a long-term plan. While an indie label tends to have, like Thomas said, you tend to look at this project from all sides and see, okay, what can we do for this project in the next 3 years, and how can we break them? Not just, okay, do more TikToks. So yeah.
Great points.
Just a quick analogy about football, if I may. I think
yes, please.
In a way, the majors kind of act like the top flight football teams, the Champions League teams, in that they have huge resources. They can sign stuff just to kind of fill the bench. They don't necessarily have a kind of very strong grassroots development program. Some of them do, but they can easily poach an act once they've got the data, they've got the stats, they see that they're performing. They can swoop in and purchase, or I'm going a bit too far with the football analogy, but they can sign acts that other entities have developed and put time and effort and love into, and that's I think where some of the real frustration comes from.
But in football, just as in music, we had Bayer Leverkusen killing the season last year, so some positives over there. Okay. Not to give away the answer of the focal question of this discussion, namely, are indie labels the new powerhouses of the music industry? But the short answer is yes, indeed. That's what the stats are saying. I mean, the indie repertoire on Spotify is growing by the year, with margins that are even hard to grasp. So that is a fact, right? So the business has changed in favor of the more personalized, artist-centric indie label model. But I really want to delve deeper into the reasons behind the indie growth. So what has changed about the way we do business and about the way we create the value of music that has allowed for this to happen?
I could start. I think there's just labels, major labels and indie labels are not the gatekeepers anymore to release and to promote music. Like even 20, 30 years ago, you needed to sign to a label to release your music physically and digitally, and now like artists can record music in their bedrooms and then release it on their own via a digital distributor, and great music comes out of it. So it's so indie, the market share grew for indie music, but indie music is also DIY, self-released music via digital distributors. So it's very diverse and very different in between this indie music market share. So that changed. It's become way easier to release and promote your own music with the help of an indie label or just by yourself and the help of managements or promoters that you know or like friends.
So basically the internet happened.
Yeah, that is a thing, of course, but with that arose a challenge, right? Because now we have a lot more music being released all the time, so the competition must be a lot higher. And yeah, maybe we can talk about that as well, because before maybe it was harder to start, but once you started, it was easier to break. And now it's easier to start, but once you've started, it's harder to break. So how do we navigate all of the competition? How do we get through the flooding of music? You know, we've all heard the numbers. What is it right now? 160K new songs a day? Is that the number? Something like this, yeah?
A little, from my perspective and what I keep telling to the acts I work with, everyone will tell you that talent and everything like that and social media and you have to post and everything. But consistency, I think, is key. Because people who tend to start a lot of them tend to get lost on the way because it's just something of a hype. I don't know, everyone, like in Romania 5 years ago, everyone was doing a trap song just for fun. But people who have been consistent, at least in the last 2 or 3 years, we've had acts breaking through who have been consistent for 4 or 5 years until they really reached their audience or they grew as an act and matured. So I think what people don't really take into consideration when they're giving advice to artists is just that consistency is key. You have to be present every day and do it, especially when you have like 2 fans and you're not on a rising wave.
When you say consistency, I'm guessing that you also mean quantity, right? So you got to be. When you say consistency, I'm guessing that you also mean quantity. So you got to be frequent with your posting, with your
Not necessarily.
releasing.
You should post and you should release as on your own schedule, because social media and Spotify tends to make you feel like you have to be present every day. The platforms can work for you, not just you working for them, as long as you have like your own schedule and you can be on your own time. You don't have to hurry just because you see everyone else doing, but it still needs to happen. You can't say that I'm putting out a song a year and I'm waiting for someone to discover me, because that's rarely gonna happen.
And other than the lack of that many gatekeepers, what do you think has changed in order for this change to happen? In order for this movement to a more indie-centric world?
Yeah, I also think like that with that democratization of music is that the indies could basically keep doing what they're doing, because I think essentially the indies have always been about like catering to either a niche audience or like a specific region, at least talking about the smaller ones. And I think like with the personalization of social media as well, it's really about finding your own community and being as authentic as possible to tap into the audience that wants that. And I think the majors are still trying to stick to their old recipe of like going for the masses. And I think that's the reason why indies like maintain as successful, but even get successful, because that is becoming more and more important.
People indeed want to be treated and curated better, right? I mean, even with the rising of platforms like Patreon, which is, I'm guessing a direct competitor to YouTube in one way or another. We're just saying that, you know, nobody is falling for the mass product that often anymore. So the audience is a lot more demanding, right? But yeah, in any case, with that said, I want to divert to the exact ways of how you navigate that new world that we're living in, right? So we already established that it's a lot more music that is being released on a daily basis. The audience has become a lot more demanding. So how do we employ those, as we call them, direct-to-fan strategies in order to succeed?
Well, I was gonna just share one strategy that we did on the most recent Idols campaign. Sorry, I feel like I've talked about Idols all the time. The most recent Idols campaign, which came out, the album came out in February this year, but we announced it in October last year. And basically, we wanted to put on a secret show in London, and the goal was that that Idols would play this secret show, no one would know about it, and the next morning, and we'd announce the album on that night as well, while they're on stage, basically. And then the next morning, everyone wakes up and there's like, oh my God, there's a new Idols album. There's a new that's been announced. There's a new Idols single. They played a show last night. Like all these people were there. I wasn't, kind of like we wanted it to make it feel like if you weren't there, you're really missing out. And we were kind of experimenting with influencer marketing, and I really hate just even talking about influencer marketing. But for want of a better word, we were talking about like how can we kind of, we were doing the show at Village Underground. There's only so many people that can be there. We're not announcing that it's happening. How can we like get this to spread as quickly as possible? And so we kind of like meticulously went through all of the bands, all the people who follow Idols on Instagram and on other social medias. And then also looked at who the band were following in terms of like celebrities. And then we crafted messages and we sent them from the band's Instagram account, like as direct messages to all these different people, being like, hey, we're playing a secret show at Village Underground like next week. Let us know if you want to come. We can add you to the guest list. And it worked really well. And we ended up having like Florence and the Machine came, Jamie T came, Idris Elba came. We had a comedian called Paul Foot. He came, and it worked. Like at the next stage, it's like there were a ton of videos online, and I think that was like definitely quite an effective way. And we've actually just done a very similar thing with their show in LA last week, and Tony Hawk came with his son, so that was quite cool. Yeah.
So you're activating the FOMO in people.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember seeing it. I can't remember, but I remember seeing a show, and it was a show in London, and I woke up one morning, it was like Boy Genius and Billie Eilish had just like been on stage together, and it was all over my social media, and I was like, wow, that is actually, and I had that exact effect on me. I was like, oh my God, there was a show, I didn't know about it, like why wasn't I there? Yeah. And that was very much the idea of like, okay, let's do this for Idols, like how can we make it feel like really exciting, brand new album, like new creative, and the album's called Tank, so we build the show as the headliner was a band called Tank, and we put up some like fly posters around London, and we did actually see people online being like, who's this band Tank that no one's ever heard of that's headlining Village Underground? And it just so happened that there was an artist called Tank, and they have like 90 monthly listeners on Spotify, and so lucky them, they got a bunch of free marketing for us.
Great. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, you mentioned the top-down communication at major labels, that like marketing managers at major labels like force a campaign strategy or force that kind of influencer marketing on a campaign just to make it grow and like put money in it and then make it fly digitally, and that sometimes doesn't make sense. And in the Idols case, it's just a perfect case of how an influencer campaign is authentic and real and not just doesn't seem wrong. And we've got a lot of artists at Pierce and all the connected labels that just doesn't feel the way of clowning on social media and just constantly talking to their audience and talk in ways that they don't feel well with. So it's on us to discuss with them on a daily basis almost ways to communicate with their fans that they feel and that is authentic to everyone. And one way could be to look who's following the band and look for influencers that are not bought but that are friends and fans of the band anyway, or things like newsletter marketing, because if artists don't feel social media bullshit, then maybe maybe newsletter marketing is the right thing to them, that they send, like Nick Cave is the perfect example for a newsletter king. Like, his newsletter is brilliant, and I don't know how many subscribers, but there's thousands of subscribers to get personal questions answered by Nick Cave. And there's a German band too that we have on our roster called Turbostart, and if they announce an album with their personal newsletter, there's 5,000 pre-orders on the album. So that's a very important tool of direct to fans communication and marketing.
Great.
Yeah, and I think that's very much also about like knowing where your fans are and understanding like what they want and how they're behaving. I think a recent example from my side is we recently released the album by Paris Paloma, and her fans were in this Discord server where she sometimes dropped in to also chat with them, and they were talking a lot about books. So then a colleague of mine had a brilliant idea to put a kind of a book trading shop next to the merch stand at live shows, and they ended up like queuing in line for hours just to like swap books with each other. I think that's a good example of like knowing your fans, knowing where they are, and like tapping into that interest directly.
I really want to hear about Globo as well. I'm not going to steal any strategies, I promise.
We've actually been doing newsletter marketing for a year and a half too, and I think it's been great. It's been driving up pre-sales, pre-saves and stuff like that. But I think all the subjects has been pretty much covered. Of course, I think everyone here is doing like choosing the influencers based on people who actually enjoy being at a concert for a band. Otherwise, you'll have, I don't know, in a 300 capacity, 300 whole capacity, you'll have like 50 people there who don't really care about who's playing. Yeah. And I think that's essential. Some of the things we have, aside from being the marketing manager, I'm also managing one of the biggest bands in Romania. And we have an internal influencer sort of group that we constantly feed content for them, like for every activation we're doing and stuff like that. They're constantly the first to know about it, and they share everything on their socials, because the band is not that active. Like, it posts 2 times, 3 times a month, and we kind of found a way around it through various micro-influencers, macro-influencers, or fan type of pages on TikTok and Instagram.
And do you do that through a broadcast channel?
Sorry?
Do you do that through a broadcast channel?
No, it's direct communication between me, the lead singer, and the influencers.
Nice. Pretty smart.
As I work in neighbouring rights, I know absolutely nothing about direct-to-fan strategies, but I'll try and give a really bad summary of something Warp did, just as another example. So Aphex Twin is one of Warp's most famous artists. If you don't know, he's a sort of electronic pioneering producer, some of it quite challenging, some of it sort of remarkably tender, and a very, very loyal fan base who sort of veer sometimes towards the nerdy end of the fan spectrum. And so in order to generate some buzz for the release of a recent EP, some kind of puzzles and breadcrumbs dropped in Reddit forums and threads, which would lead people to a hidden site where they could solve some more puzzles and unlock some more information. And then there was sort of coded directions to find QR codes, which once you scanned it, you then had sort of AR up on your phone, which turned into a box with the Aphex Twin symbol, and you could step inside it. And there was further elaboration on what the new EP was going to be and so on. Very specific to Aphex Twin and very carefully considered, but just another way of kind of being inventive, I guess, with what you can do with digital technology these days.
Yeah. What really resonates from all your answers is that pretty much everything that we do is digital, right? We're not really investing into the traditional way of marketing anymore, and yeah, as Alex said, internet just happened. So I'm gonna take a different approach now, and I'm gonna skip to this one. So obviously we have it good right now because indies are leading the way, and they are paving the new strategies that the majors are oftentimes even copying directly, I want to say. But on the negative side, what are the biggest challenges that an indie label faces?
I think with the democratization of music creation and music releasing and the big volumes that we have, it's like the top of the funnel is bigger, so it's harder as like a developing artist to get into the system. And I think also with how the bigger players like Spotify and TikTok are behaving, like they used to have like reps talking to the labels, and I think the way that things are getting more algorithmic, those teams are getting smaller. They have less resources to actively talk to the players on the label side. It's harder to it's even harder to develop those smaller artists, and I think that's a challenge right now. Don't know if it's the biggest challenge, but it's definitely a thing I see happening right now.
I would disagree with that and say because there is such a massive volume of music being released, which we also talked about like 5 minutes ago. I think it and like sort of going back to what we were saying earlier about fans, it's so important to find a fan base. Like you just can't have success without a fan base, even if it's a small one. Like I think as an artist, you need to find who those fans are and super serve them, and not to keep going on and on about idols. I do work with them, but I'm not like obsessed with them.
I think you're a fan.
But they do have this crazy fan base. I mean, crazy amazing in a great way. When we first signed them in 2017, there were 500 members in this Facebook group called Afghan. There's now 37,000, I think, which has just grown in the last 5 years.
Sorry, is that just the core fan base?
Sorry?
37,000 is just the core fan base.
Well, basically
Wow.
it's this, and it's amazing to see. But the band is so good at super serving them. Like we have Afghan pre-sales, so like they have early access to tickets. We have like a special mailer for them. Joe designs merch for them, like every single album campaign, and we even on the last record we started doing like Afghan meetups, so like it shows. But it's so amazing to watch. Like fans will message in the group being like, hey, like. I got tickets to the Glasgow show, but like I don't know anyone in Glasgow, and then like 5 people will be like, you can stay at my house, like we're going to the show too, and people are like always giving tickets away for free or to charity and stuff. It's just like a really lovely space, but I think fans are so important. And then from a label perspective, I think also, especially with the developing bands and the baby bands, it's like we can't hit everyone. I think it's so crucial to find who your champions are, whether it's like a radio presenter, or someone at Spotify, or like, and go for the kind of niche playlisting. Like I think again, you don't want to be on like peaceful piano for sleeping because everyone's asleep while they're listening to it. You like with idols, where it was like focusing on this kind of rock and punk playlist. So yeah, finding your champions and really just nurturing and super serving a fan base is so important. And without that, it's a big challenge.
And Henry, that's specifically for you, not to put you on the spot as I promised, but here I am doing it. How about dealing with collective management organizations as an indie label? Because just as with any other business, the more volume you have, the better treatment you receive usually. But how do you navigate between not having that much volume as an indie, but still receiving the same treatment and the same quality of work?
I mean, there's a challenge even before that, in that just going back to the difference in the major versus indie models, the benefits of indie agility mean you can adapt and change quickly, but also it means that things can be quite centralized, and the neighboring rights world is very fragmented. There's no globally adopted standard of data. We're working towards it, but it's not there yet. And the majors tend to have local offices who have their own databases, potentially connected with a central one, and they tend to have the membership with a collecting society. And that, you know, at a local level, that will work well. Whereas if you're an indie and you're going to try and join these CMOs directly, that's a lot of memberships, that's a lot of different data formats that you've got to submit your data in. And that's before you even then get to the point of actually being taken seriously as a member with your lower volume of repertoire. And I think all you can do really is the best you can in terms of following what's happening in each territory, and what the rules are, what the distribution schedules are, what the copyright landscape is. This is probably making everyone feel quite stressed, but I mean that's what you do, or you find a partner to do it with you. But that's one of the few, I guess, downsides of being smaller and more agile. It's the fragmentation. You know, you can deliver to Spotify once and you can hit all territories. There is an initiative called RDX, which I'll very, very quickly mention, which is planning to be a single point of entry for data for neighbouring rights, which will then go out to other societies, but it's not fully adopted. And also there's a challenge in getting your data into it, because that requires resource, technology resource, people resource. So yeah, you need, the biggest challenge is resource actually when it comes to CMOs.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, Thomas?
I think I can talk about the A&R perspective. What the biggest challenge is that the internet and artists at very early stages are on TikTok and are on Instagram, and everyone can see if someone is talented or not. So, and you need to make newcomers trust you as an indie label to be the right partner to establish them as an artist and to work with and to start working with, and give some royalties for this service to establish someone. And a lot of newcomers nowadays start releasing themselves, and if they have early success and they start with millions of streams and a 100% royalty share because they are released via DistroKid, for example, then the major labels will jump on it and they just jump over the indie label gap. So we, as an indie label, as A&Rs for indie labels, we need to find artists that trust in our service, trust in us, in a partner, and then develop something together, a long-term strategy, and not see a bigger royalty share by releasing themselves and not seeing the quick major label money, but trusting in us as a partner, as a challenge.
Establishing trust, doing your homework. What else?
Well, I think from a marketing perspective, at least, it's a bit of a budget versus creativity, which for the majors, but I feel like this is a major label roast at times, which is really not the case, because I've worked with some of them and they're very good people, very, very skillful. But for an indie label, there's the budget threshold where you have to where you have to adjust it by being creative, and creativity doesn't always work when you want it to. So I think that, at least from a marketing perspective, from my perspective, that tends to be one of the biggest problems that we have, because you're constantly trying to build new acts, because you can't only rely on your legacy acts, and it becomes harder and harder to find that way, that core audience, and that message that they're trying to spread around, and make it different from all the 10,000 other artists who are trying to push the same thing.
That's a really important one, and you can exhaust your creatives, right? So every now and then you got to rely on budget, but then budget can be restricted. So
absolutely,
yeah, that's a great one. That's a great one. I think we're gonna do one last question to the panel before we do a Q&A, and that's gonna be for the artists and the audience, because I'm sure that there are at least a handful of them. So I know that that's a very generalized question, and I know that that's like a learn how to be top 50 on Spotify in 30 seconds kind of thing, but still, can we go for what's the #1 priority for an indie artist nowadays?
I think
Don't say TikTok.
no, for sure no. But I think we've all been saying it, like finding the right audience. This pretty much has been like the main subject of the discussion. I think once you have that nailed down, even though you currently have 3 fans, but once you know what your audience looks like, you know where to find them, you know how to address them.
And sorry, but to find that audience, you mostly got to rely on data, right?
Not necessarily. It's like a behavior type of thing, because if you know like a certain individual, you kind of have the profile for the audience. Like, so you'll know he'll be okay. If you're aiming for people over 30, you might find them on Facebook and stuff like that. This is very general.
The target persona.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because my role is kind of ex-UK and ex-North America, but those are the 2 places where our main offices are. We obviously have an office in Berlin. One of the most important things for me is, and I always go on about this at work, is like is a global marketing campaign, but with local execution. And a campaign has to feel localized. Like what we're doing in France is almost certainly not going to definitely also work in Tokyo or in Japan. And so I think the work we're always trying to do is like how can we take this global campaign that looks and feels really concise and succinct, but make it have like a local feel for fans in different markets. So like, for example, on the most recent Cigarettes After Sex campaign, we had the lyrics to some of the songs translated into like 12 different languages. We did Mandarin, we did Spanish, we did Baha Indonesian, we did Malay, and then we uploaded those as closed captions onto YouTube so that fans can then, just at home, it's so simple, just like sit at home and actually like enjoy the songs, listen to the songs in their own native language, or read the captions. And then we've done other things like, on the Idols campaign, we did like a bunch of midnight release parties. So we did Marillions in Madrid, and we worked with Tower in Tokyo, and like a bunch of record shops basically all over the world, and we got them to open up at like very late or close to midnight on the eve of the album release. We had this special glow-in-the-dark vinyl that you could only buy if you went to one of these parties. And then we made all these like cute, like we had like little postcards in Japanese, which used kind of like old archival like Japanese photos of wrestlers. And then the Spanish ones, they were different again, and they were all in Spanish. And I don't know, it's just like little touches, I think. But I think that the main point is that that kind of global marketing campaign, but with a local execution is really important.
Yeah, I think we can sum it up to catering to your audience, like catering to it on a on a territorial approach, or at least on a specific like group level approach.
Yeah. And actually, just one other thing I would say is really important, which we haven't really touched on too much, is visuals. Like, because everyone is living online right now, your campaign has to look as good as it sounds, and it's unfortunately it's not just about the music anymore. So I think we call it world building at Parsan, but it's like, okay, we get the masters delivered, but it's like, what is this world that how are we going to entice people to like live in this world with the record and the marketing and the shows and everything? Like, it all has to fit together, and like, otherwise, why would you want to be a part of it? Why would you care? Why would you buy a record? But I think you can probably all imagine that example I'm going to use, but Brat has been such a perfect example of that. It was like so simple, it fit with the narrative, then they weren't like trying to tell too much of a story, but it was like Brat, like you can't go anywhere without, like, I don't think there's a single person on earth who doesn't know that record, which is crazy.
I think for indie artists, it's important to not give up if you believe in yourself and the music that you're doing, and not try to copy other people on social media or other people on other labels and try to sound or look or be the same as the successful artists. I've got one example of a German artist that we worked. She was a newcomer called Maribu. She was making German queer hyperpop music, and she was exhausted by posting on TikTok and on social media all the time. But then she didn't know if German hyperpop has an audience at all. But then half through the campaign, Spotify started Hyperpop Germany playlist. We were pitching for all the different playlists for her music, and no playlist fit at all. And then Spotify started Hyperpop Germany, and there was like 5 songs of this artist in the playlist. So it was the right decision to stick to the music and to stick to her sound and not bend and not look to other artists, but believe in yourself, and then the big players will come and create a space for you because it feels important and the audience is growing.
Some great points, honestly. Should we move on to the Q&A? How should we do this? Is somebody passing the mic around? Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, we're open to anything.
Hi, I'm Ellie. I'm a music artist and producer. Just in terms of the stuff about social media, a lot of the major indies, like the iconic artists, I suppose, like Aphex Twin, Burial, all of that, they're quite like elusive, as like their personas are more like not really giving a shit about the artist. And I think like as maybe someone who is starting out with an indie, and there's what strategies are there like for artists who maybe don't have that kind of established track record of like having that kind of character, but would like to sort of build that, as opposed to maybe the more Taylor Swift style approach of like trying to be friends with your fans. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean it in like an edgy way. Yeah, so how do you think, like what strategies do you think there are?
If I can give like a quick example. I'll ask you another question. Do you like doing music videos as an artist?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Then try and think of social media as a string of small music videos that you're doing to showcase your art. Because if you think about doing trends or being like someone else or trying to steal a strategy, is not going to work for you. Basically, you cannot be Radiohead at the moment because that's kind of a different era and everything is a sign of the times at the end of the day. But you have to see how it can work in your favor. You don't have to post daily, you don't have to post 3 times a day or anything like that. Find your own rhythm, find your own type of content, which should be around your music and around you, the way you are as an act. And afterwards, everything will follow.
I would just add that I think when you're really starting out, like we actually have an artist on our roster right now who's tiny, like we've just signed. And is exactly like that, like just is like, oh, but Aphex Twin never posts, so like why do I have to? And like I think there's to a certain degree there's a small element of like, I think you can, like an artist sort of almost has, I hope this doesn't sound too harsh, but like the artist almost has to kind of like earn the right to not have to post, if that makes sense. Like grow your audience to a certain size, and you can go back and delete all those posts and then just have this like kind of like persona of like never posting, because it is really cool. But I would just say, would you agree with this? Like Aphex is, so many of our artists like will use Aphex as an example, and it is like kind of 1 in a million, like in terms of like how massive he is and how he really doesn't post. But we have other artists, like Cigarettes After Sex is probably our biggest artist, and they in one whole album campaign, we'll do 2 posts on social media. And again, like something in the algorithm, it works for them, and they can because their audience is big enough. But I would say when you're really starting out, kind of be open to posting a bit more, and then you can kind of dial it back in, I reckon.
You still got to do the work, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, you still got to do the work. That's what I said.
Yeah, I think so. Like you said, find your way of doing things. Like, see it as a creative output in some way, and just be consistent, and then your audience will follow.
Thank you.
Next up. Hello.
Hi, thanks for the panel. I'm Virgo. I have a question about direct to fan monetization. And I mean, as labels, however indie, at the end of the day, you still have to make some money. And you talked about more holistic and more long-term investment in developing your artists. Do you, as part of your deal structure, also tap into artists direct to fan monetization that goes beyond just selling or licensing recordings? That can be just directly micro donations from fans to artists.
Yeah. I could actually step out of my role as a moderator here and answer that one. One of the biggest Bulgarian rappers that is signed to us, his name is Fighter. He is pretty big, but mostly because he is more than a rapper, he's also a social persona, right? So he's a propagandist of working out and taking care of yourself, taking care of your family. And then we decided to take this out of his artistic persona and put it on a Patreon channel where we started creating special, I would call them vlogs, where he shares very deep actual insights into how he lives in order to be able to be, a stand-up man in today's society. And of course, then you do a monetization model on this, and it's a tierization model rather, where you allow access to special fans for say $5, and then for $10 you also get to ask a question that can be answered in the next video. Then for $15 you can, I don't know, maybe get a chance to meet the guy, and you can play around with these as much as you want. But Patreon has been a key platform for us to be able to tap into the direct-to-fan monetization.
Yeah, and then I want to say, like, based on your type of deal that you have with your label, you tap into that, monetization or not.
Did you ask from a label perspective or from an artist perspective? Or whatever, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, we do it, I don't know. How about you guys?
So basically, it really depends on the deal. If it's a Patreon account or something like that, most of the times we don't do it unless it's an idea. We set it up and we discussed it with the artist beforehand. And it's never like, okay, I'm going to have you do this Patreon so we can make more money or something like that. If it's a shared idea that we decided to build something and we're helping towards making it successful, there is definitely going to be a conversation about the splits. Other than that, if there's an artist who just wants to start doing that, we never said no, and we never said, okay, where's our cut?
I think we've got time for one last question. I think we don't have one last question. Okay. Well, guys, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining. To all of you in the audience, thank you so much for attending and going through this. We really hope that it was beneficial for you. We're going to stay here for 5 or 10 more minutes if everybody wants to have a chat. And enjoy So Alive.